Now, in last Thursday's video, I talked about the great paradox of God and suffering, and how some argue that because suffering exists, therefore God cannot exist. However, I suggested that there is strong evidence for God's existence in spite of the obvious reality of suffering. Thanks to modern science, we know clearly that our universe literally came into being from nothing, which is why most scientists acknowledge that there must be some sort of God. What's more is that when we study the complexity of our universe, it's clear that God is a genius on a level completely above and beyond us. Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and Stephen Hawking were all kindergarten failures in the comparison. So I concluded by saying that while it makes no sense to us mortals why a super intelligent divine being would allow suffering to exist, he must have his reasons, as unappealing, as absurd, and as counterintuitive as that may seem to us. Now, in a nutshell, that's the argument made in the ancient book of Job of the Old Testament. The main character, Job, had his life torn apart for reasons he never even understood. He was a good man. He was a righteous man. Yet he suddenly lost everything: his health, his family, his wealth. He clearly hadn't done anything to deserve what happened to him. There was nothing about him, nothing about how he lived, which we could point to and say, okay, so that's why. Now it all begins to make sense. And his suffering completely contradicted the ancient worldview of his day, where it was believed that suffering was a divine punishment for wrongdoing. And so the main part of this story involves three of Job's friends trying to get him to fess up to some hidden sin or skeleton in his closet that was responsible for it all. Job simply needed to repent. Yet Job rightly maintained his innocence, but then made the mistake of pointing a finger at God and blaming him. So the book ends not only with God rebuking Job's friends for their bad theology, but also for Job's assumption that he knew more than God. The last few chapters of the book of Job, God questions Job about his knowledge of the universe and if he thought he knew more about it than God did. Job is quickly humbled. He realized that God was God and he was not. Now, while the book ends on a happy note with Job's health, family, and wealth being restored, it doesn't give us a straight answer as to why there is suffering or why bad things happen to good people. Rather, its message is that we are to be faithful in good times and in bad. That while, yes, there can be a cause and effect sometimes with suffering, often there isn't. Tragedy strikes just because, whether you're a good person or not. And so we must trust God and remain faithful to Him when that happens. Thanks for watching, and as always, I hope to see you next Thursday.